Welcome to Feisty Chess. We've been paired as black against Iwan Grozny in a 15-10 game on chess.com. Okay, we got d4. I'm going to play knight f6. I've had a request for the King's Indian defense. We'll see if we can get that on the board. I tried that once. Okay. Seems like we're going to have a chance for the King's Indian here. g6, we'll go bishop g7 and then castle. Get d6 in there at some point. King's Indian is a great kingside attacking weapon in many lines. White is reluctant to play e4 here. Probably he'll play it here. Alright, going for bishop g5 instead. We'll just go ahead with d6 anyway. e3. Okay. Not going for e4, which is the more ambitious King's Indian idea. So I'm looking at ideas of h6, and if bishop drops back to h4, pushing g5. And if he goes bishop g3, I've got the got the bishop pair, but that could actually, if he's planning on castling queenside, that could only accelerate things for him. Let's play a flexible move here. Let's get our knight to d7. Put the ball in white's court. Okay. Looking like castling queenside is a real option here. I could play e5. That puts my knight in a pin. But e5 would be thematic here. But if he wants to castle queenside, let's just play c6. You don't know what else to do, just restrict your opponent's pieces. He could play a bishop move here, and if he goes, I don't know, bishop e2, bishop d3. Okay, he's not castling queenside. He's not castling queenside. I'm thinking about swinging my knight to b6 and getting in bishop f4 as long as his queen is on c2. I could combine that idea with e5. No, e5 doesn't work now because the queen and the rook are aligned. And he could always meet any knight move with bishop d3. So let's just move our queen off that rook's diagonal. c7 seems nice. Sorry, not diagonal. Rook's file, the d file. Okay, Iwan Grozny is higher rated than me. Had an unfortunate run-in with a lower-rated player yesterday. That game that illustrated the pitfalls of pre-moves and just not checking for alternatives before obvious recaptures. I had a draw. Okay, the bishop is coming to e2. I wonder if my knight belongs on b6. Or if instead, maybe rook e8 and then knight f8 might be a better route for that knight. Also have queenside ideas. I could go with a4, although I'm not getting any further than a4 at the moment. Sorry, a5. I'm not getting to a4. I could also go knight e8. Not now that my e-pawn would be hanging. Yeah, there's a couple reasons to play a rook here. Let's do that. I still retain the option of e5. Although, I mean, it opens up my game a bit. I'm not sure what it does for me beyond that. Knight f8. Looking to play bishop. I could simply go d5 here. Maybe a5 is a better place for my queen. All right, I need to make a decision. Let's go ahead and play e5. It's just, I know it's thematic. And we have it supported sufficiently now. Do I want to keep that diagonal open at the expense of this pawn being weak? Recapturing with a knight. Recapturing with the knight also frees my bishop, but he doesn't have to take, and this pawn could just be simply weak on the on d6. I'm going to retake with the pawn. Pretty sure we've equalized, for what that's worth, but that's not exactly what the King's Indian player always wants. Knight could come to c5 now. I like the looks of that. Knight on c5, and I have ideas of pushing e4. Okay, he outlaws that, outrules that, overrules that. Is now a good time for a5? I could get away with e4 right now. Is that just a weakness? He goes knight d2. I don't see how I hang on to e4. Queen e5. But then bishop f4. Yeah, it doesn't look good for me. Maybe our knight just wants to come to e6 via f8. We also have ideas of bishop f5 now. He could meet that with bishop d3. But then I may have a fork on e4. Which wouldn't work except for the tactics involving me taking on d3 with either a pawn or bishop. For instance, let's say, I don't know, bishop h4 right now as a move, anticipating knight e6. Bishop h4, bishop f5. Okay, this might be what we get here. Bishop f5. Here we go. Bishop f5, bishop d3, e4. He has to respond to that. If he goes bishop takes f6, I've got d takes e4, and I'm hitting his queen, so he can't. I'll win a piece there. He can't respond except by taking that pawn. So e4, bishop takes. Knight takes. Oh, I'm on that multiple times here. Well, this is not super committal right now, so this could force him to play e5, e4. What if he plays e4? I take with the knight. Oh, he's got it defended enough times. I've also got bishop g4 at my disposal. Alright, let's go for bishop f5. In the interest of time, you've got to make a move. Yeah, okay. That does shut down my own bishop. Let's go ahead and do this. Now, now knight e6 comes with a little more threat, and actually I can come to, if the bishop drops back to h5, I can jump into to f4 with my knight. I'm not afraid to give up my light square bishop here for his knight. His knight is a lot more active than his bishop will be on f3. He could double on the d file. And I think knight e6 would be a mistake because my knight covers d7. So if he doubles with rook f to d1, knight e6, bishop takes f7, sorry, bishop takes f6, and then bishop takes, and he can land his rook on d7. Okay. Do I want to give him this M balance? I do. Actually, I can, if I play this right, I can land into d4 with a knight. And he hasn't doubled yet, so maybe knight right now is a good idea. If he does double, I can always just meet it with rook a to d8. Or knight d4 in this case. Okay, so that knight on d4 Be a very strong piece. Or if he lets me... It won't let me grab the bishop, I'm sure. But where's he going with it? Actually, bishop e3 would cover d4. Okay. Maybe b6 is an idea? Okay, can I play rook d8? Rook takes d8, rook takes d8, bishop takes. Yeah, that's a pawn he cannot take. Wanting to jump my knight into d4 yet again. I want to get this knight out of the way so I can have extra support on d4. The only way to do that right now is going knight h5, which is definitely a weakness. But I'd also have an open file. Also looking at knight f4 with knight h5. I think he'd have to take. And then my knight's getting into d4. I could also go without the structural damage and just trade off a pair of rooks. Okay, let's play b6. There's some lines where he can grab on a7 without getting punished. And we'll continue to percolate those ideas to get our knight into d4. He could go knight to d2 to try to shut that down. Do I have knight d4 right now? Bishop takes, pawn takes. Knight d4, bishop takes. Pawn takes, rook takes pawn. Maybe I should have used my king's rook to move to d1, to d8, so I'd have a space for my knight to go. I could try knight d7, but then that knight's going nowhere. Oh, wow. Big change here. Now my knight can go somewhere if I go to d7. His knight's also planning on going somewhere, unfortunately. Okay. Okay, I'm expecting knight d5. I will take. That gives my king's knight something to do. And then I'm jumping into d4 after that. And my bishop is suddenly a force. And this way I might make him trade off his good bishop rather than that ugly thing on f3. Some way I could maybe attack that c4 as a weakness? Possibly. If he goes, let's say knight d5, knight takes d5, e takes d5, knight d4, his rooks look kind of silly on that file. Okay, here we go. I've been wanting to get rid of that knight. His rooks look a little silly on that file, and I at least have one rook that is ready to push on a different file. Is he considering c takes? I guess that pins my c pawn if he does that. Okay. I could also go knight f4 here, but really like the look of d4. This at least guarantees us a bishop pair. He needs to take it, and I will be taking with my... Ooh, tough question. Tough question. I'm initially saying my e-pawn. Gives my rook an open file. And it opens up my bishop's diagonal a little better. Yeah, that's probably the right move. And my queen's diagonal. Okay. But the alternative was that super weak c-pawn. But he'll always have a light square bishop to grab to defend that. So I'm going to go with the e-pawn. I wonder if I can use some kind of... Okay. This might just allow me to double on this file. Looks safe enough. He's got some lines with d6 and bishop c6 I need to work out here. But I think I'm okay with that. I win a pawn, and I'll be grabbing rooks on the d file so we can liquidate. I'll just be a pawn up. So let's... And a curious kind of symmetry to this position. I keep forgetting to put my time markers up, but if I recall, 25 moves, I was thinking have 7 minutes left by then, so I'm a few minutes behind, as usual. But it's not dire. I just need to remember to move quickly now. Bishop e5 is an interesting idea here. Okay, what's the idea of this move? Blockading with the queen. Should I do the same? Doesn't seem to be a very happy queen. This idea of bishop e5 intrigues me. I don't know why, but I needed to play it. If we get f5 in, that would really limit White's pieces, bishop and queen right now. But it would also open up some holes. And if I could provoke... Oh. It's really coming at me here. Okay, f5, and I think he has to go back. He's going for a kingside attack, which I don't think is there. f5, rook h5 is the idea, but then bishop f3, rook h6, bishop g5. He's just losing that rook. So let's go f5. We've got our second rank really defended strongly anyway. He does go back. Okay, I like the bishop as a blockading piece here. His queen doesn't have any entry on the e-file. So yeah, the bishop blockades nicely. Just rules out any d6 possibilities. Probably didn't need to be concerned with those. And if he plays g3 to try to give his bishop room to sit back on g2, I will be going for... Okay. But this allows us to activate our bishop. Are we hanging anything here? Bishop f4, rook takes, rook. Yeah, we may be hanging a bishop by doing that. Actually, rook takes, and then I can just go... I don't want his queen coming into my position. This might lead to a forced draw, but I think I've worked out the tactics so that it is a draw. If he tries rook takes... I can just go for for queen. Bishop takes queen. I made that move awfully quickly. There's a lot of things to work out here. I could even give up the queen for the rook and the bishop. Oh yeah, here we go. And if he wants to go rook takes rook, king f7, and he'll have nothing better than I mean, I can force opposite bishop's ending where my king will have better position than his. And he can't take the queen because I got rook takes e1 check, king h2, bishop e5 will win that rook. Sorry, bishop f4 check will win that rook. So he kind of has to go for the rook on e8 here. I can see my king having some kind of path into the position much more quickly than his king in that case. Might have to make the analysis quick on this one, fellas. I've got a engagement to get to in about 20 minutes. I didn't even see that stinger, that bishop f4 check. That works out nicely. I don't see anything. I don't understand what he's spending his time thinking on here. I think he's got to go rook takes rook. Oh, he walks into this. Well, happens to the best of us. I made similar tactical oversights and had to post them on YouTube as well. He may resign here. But my next move is bishop takes c7. All right, thank you, Iwan Grozny, for the game. Let's analyze this. Try to do so quickly this time. Okay, the King's Indian defense. We're all on track to play it here. Okay, computer has done its thing. I forgot to go full screen here. All right. Bishop g7. e4 is the main move. He goes with knight e3. We can still transpose if he still goes e4. But then bishop g5. This is still book. d6 I'm sure is a book move. We can still go e4, e3. Okay, also a book move, but the computer doesn't like it quite as well. Okay, we're still in book here. And that's the end of the book for the computer. Queen c2 and bishop e2 are both the moves. c6 also likes h6, getting that in. I never did end up playing that. Don't like weakening unnecessarily, and that bishop looks like it might be vulnerable to tactics along the 5th rank, my 4th rank. So leaving the bishop there is fine. c6 is good. Rook d1 is excellent. Again, bishop e2 is getting closer to castling. Let's see, a6. a6. When my c-pawn covers b5 already, I'm hesitant to play a6, but I think the idea is we're going to play d5, and then we can capture with a pawn, and the knight can't come in to harass the queen on b5 because we covered that with a6. So once the c6 pawn goes to d5, we have b5 covered. But rook e8 is fine. h3, huh? Gives white a pawn advantage here. e5 is best. Okay, the computer approves of my decision to play e5 here. D takes. Let's see what knight takes would have looked like for the computer's evaluation. Okay, equally good. I was worried about leaving a weakness on d6. D takes e5. b4. Wow, we both played really well so far. a5 is best. Okay, yeah, going ahead and running in there with a5. Giving our rook a little more scope, forcing him to do something about that. If he just plays a3, then we trade and we've got an open file for our rook. Maybe. Knight f8. Rook d2 is inaccurate. Okay, bishop f5 is best. And if e4, that's best. Bishop g4. Okay, it was good of me to provoke e4, leaving weaknesses on f4 and especially d4. Especially since my knight is already en route to that square. h3 is good. Bishop takes. And again, in this position, when you capture on f3 with a bishop, and you've already got an e4 pawn, that's often a the bishop pair isn't really worth much in these scenarios. You see that bishop wasn't worth a whole lot right there. Knight e6 is best. Okay, it says knight d4 anyway. Knight d4 anyway. So there's tactics. There's always tactics on this diagonal, even when this knight obstructs the bishop. So what I wanted to do is move my knight somewhere. He didn't have anywhere good to go. But to move my knight somewhere so I could play knight to d4 and have the bishop give one more backup piece to that square. But knight d4 anyway is good. It says queen d1 to just cover that bishop. So if we take instead, rook takes, knight g4. This is very King's Indian stuff. Oh, wow. That knight has to be taken because there's a mate threat. Okay, that's a pattern I feel like I've got to know if I want to play the King's Indian in the future, and I do want to play the King's Indian. So, yeah, the knight can get to d4. That's one way to activate that bishop through these tactical means. And when my queen's on on this diagonal here, I can, yeah, and if he goes knight e2, then what? d3. There's a lot more to this. d3, and I force one of these pieces to take on d3. Now I can take on e4. And this rook has no useful discoveries. And I've evened up the material. I got the better part of equality here. Knight maybe was wanting to come to g5 next. Or we could just play f5 and strengthen that puppy. Okay, so should have jumped in there immediately. There were tactics. That's one I should have noticed anyway. If take, as we demonstrate here, is if take, knight g5 wins the exchange. The knight has to be taken or there's mate. And following that, we just grab up a rook. And we're just up in exchange for a pawn, up for a pawn, but yeah, this looks great for black. The other line, bishop take, pawn takes, and then knight e2. This is trickier to see because I don't see how to save this pawn. And the point is we're not going to save it, we're going to keep going with it. And if rook takes d2, we've got knight e4. If queen takes d2, however, the move must be rook a to d8. And then we'll get that pawn at the end of it anyway. We can just trade rooks. And now we're hitting the queen as well. So yeah, liquidating moves, and that big bad bishop on g7 exercises its influence tactically through the knight, because the knight can come to g4 with a mate threat. Okay. Really useful to remember. I think I'm going to memorize this game at least up to that sequence. It really likes. When did white go wrong here? Okay, h3. It wanted rook f to d1. Just go ahead and continue doubling. h3 kind of wastes a move because I'm probably going to trade that bishop for the knight anyway. The knight's actually a good piece on f3, the bishop not so much. And sometimes those temporary considerations outweigh the permanent strategical advantage of the bishop pair. So yeah, at this point, I'm doing a lot better. I went wrong with rook a to d8 a little bit. Now, knight d4 still works because I've got the same tactics. Similar tactics at least. Let's look at knight d4 and let's look at this line with takes. Takes. And now if he takes with the rook, once again I have knight g4, and that's going to win me. Well, that's complicated now. Let's look at this. It's complicated because that's not a mate on h2. Rook takes, knight g4 still does it. Okay, and what if we just save that rook? What if we save that rook like this? Queen h2. Now knight e5. Okay, we're just down a pawn. But the white king's position compensates for that. And we're looking at knight takes f3. King e2. Knight takes c4. So we're not even going to lose that pawn for good. Okay, similar idea. Even if it's not mate. black comes out to the good, thanks to the tactics on that long diagonal. The King's Indian bishop. Alright, we didn't do that. We waited, and white here played... Okay, we went with b6. b5. It's the best move. Good on white for finding that. It likes rook takes d2 here. I went ahead and went for c5. Rook takes d2, rook takes d2, knight d7. Okay, I've got to get going, so let's wrap this up. Knight d5 is inaccurate. Knight takes d5. C takes d5. C takes d5 is interesting because the idea is it, after knight d4, this pawn is actually pinned. I suppose white could take advantage of this, but he'd go down the exchange for a pawn. It likes black here. But white's got control of the center. And, yeah. That's one of the ideas with c takes, but he went for e takes. Now knight d4. E takes d4 is a mistake. C takes d4 is best. See, I didn't want to clutter up that bishop's diagonal. I wanted to unleash the queen on this diagonal and open up this file for my rook. How much does that... Okay, it gives away virtually all of my advantage. C takes d4. Now g4. And what's the idea? Rook c8? And white's just supposed to give up that pawn. What if he backs it up like this? Oh, bishop h6. He can't go to that diagonal. Okay, these long diagonals. Hopefully the King's Indian works out my bishop's my bishop tactics, especially on long diagonals. What if he tries to save it with this? Bishop h6 again, and then rook has to come here so we can still grab on c4. So that was a better idea, to make that c pawn weak and backwards. Instead I went here, and we'll just finish out the game quick since I've got to get going. Yeah, bishop f4 is a blunder. Rook takes e7, bishop takes d2. The game. So computer really likes this line for white. But I thought here he would need to play. Oh, he's got this sacrifice to win that. Okay. To go for bishop d5. But black blundered in response and went for my queen, and that was the end of the game. So, okay, crazy ending to that game. Thanks again to my opponent, Iwan Grozny, for the game. Stay feisty, folks.